Three, two, one. Welcome to the Lightforge. This is ADWCTA.
This is Merps. Hope you guys are having good runs in the arena. Also enjoying yourselves. The weather is quite nice, although I would say a little bit too sunny here in the DC area.
It's too sunny here in the New York area, so I can only imagine how it is in DC right now.
It's pretty hot, which means it's a great time to get into A-Seed environment and play Hearthstone.
Yes, more Hearthstone. This is the best part. I say this every time. Like, if you've been listening to Lightforge for the last year, 2 years, you know this is my favorite time in the meta. It's just about 2 months after the release of the expansion, like a month and a half to 2 months. This is when the meta is no longer extremely easy, when all the people who come in to see what the expansions is about have either already gone or rededicated themselves to Hearthstone, and this is when the meta is rock solid. It is not changing that much, and it's moving and so you can actually get good at something, right? You can actually get good at this meta and know what's happening.
Yeah, I completely agree, because at the very beginning or at the very end, like anything, something big happens, like what skills are being tested? It's sort of like how fast you can identify an advantage, right? Or
so the Lightforge is for.
Yeah, there you go. And which is an important skill and certainly something cool to have, but the fundamentals, the meat and potato skills, now is the time, because that's all you got. You know, you don't have sort of this arbitrage. You don't have anything to take advantage of. You just take advantage of other players. That's it.
And that's what you should be doing. That's what we're here for, to help you take advantage of other players and make them lose. No, but in about a month and a half, maybe, BlizzCon will come by. That's always in the beginning of November, and they'll announce the next expansion, and we'll all be hyped about that. But this is the zone in which there's nothing else to focus on. If you play Hearthstone Arena, you're in it for this meta. And it's a little different here because for this, we still have this hanging, pending patch, right? That's supposed to come. That's supposed to get rid of the synergy picks, which obviously have a pretty big impact on the arena. And that hasn't happened yet. So as soon as that fully hits, then we're fully into this this KFT meta of what it should be for the first time. So it's not that the meta is not going to change, but we have played around with all the cards enough to know that when the KFT meta hits, once we figure out again what the offering odds are and all of that stuff, once the synergy picks are gone, we will really be in a very stable meta. And it's KFT. It's a very skill-based meta. We saw the cards back in the day, and we looked and we predicted it was going to be, more on the board, more reward the board, but also generally speaking, more skill-based than Un'Goro. And question, whether it's the most skill-based meta, but at least it's better than it was before in terms of skill, because there are so many complicated cards, and because you're following a off-the-board expansion in Un'Goro, which has not gone away. They just took the offering bonus away, and you're adding a very on-the-board expansion. So now you've covered kind of the two major realms of how you play the arena, right? And on top of that, it's interesting in that Blizzard did not bring Curvestone back. They made on the board based on buffs without really helping your curve at all. So you're still in this weird situation where you still don't have enough 2-drops kind of hanging out. So this has been the new normal since 7.1 kicked in March. So we're kind of in, I think, the first whole meta since 7.1 was the thing, since Blizzard went to standard. Since Un'Goro kicked off. Now we are at a point in which all the cards in all the different areas of arena are fully in the meta.
Right. And I just want to differentiate sort of, when you say skill based, I know there are going to be some people out there that is wait, what's so skillful about Bone Marrow on turn 7?
No, right? Bone Marrow itself is not the skill.
Right. I think the important takeaway is just, even though there are very powerful cards in the meta right now, as there always have been, right? As there always have been, we are moving from a period in which there was so much powerful off the board cards and responses and board clears, right? To now a meta.
It's better to not be on the board half the time in Ungoro. It was like a bad thing where you're sitting there and you're like, well, I guess I don't play cards. Okay, let's hope. And you're just trying to predict what your opponent has or doesn't have. And that's not really up to you or your opponent. It's up to whether Blizzard gave your opponent that card or whether your opponent drew that card.
Yeah. So we're going from that to the KFT meta, in which it is more board-based, in which your small advantages turn after turn add up to consistently add up to a sizable advantage, right? That is less likely to be wiped away by, let's say a meteor, right?
Primordial Drake. It's like our boogeyman. We hate Primordial Drake so hard.
We do.
And it's because it's horrible card design for the arena. It's like absolutely horrible card design. But of course, the card wasn't designed for the arena. It's just no one complained enough about the Primordial Drake, and so it's still in the arena. And it's also an epic. You don't see it that often these days. Like, fine, but it's just not a good card. For this kind of like, this is what I mean when I say we're in the new normal for 7.1. Like, the curve stone is like still long dead. There have been no like real movements from Blizzard to revive Curvestone. So we still have the spell bonus on top of that, right? The spell bonus hasn't gone away. It's expanded to cover weapons, so now it's more fair among weapon and spell classes, but it's still a general direction Blizzard's pushing. Like, you will not necessarily curve out. Like, we won't even give you the chance to always draft a deck that curves out. And on top of that, there's going to be a lot more spells, so that you can counterplay a lot more. Like, things are a lot more shifting. There's a lot more flips on the board because there's a lot more spells, and all the cards got a lot more powerful. And on top of that, you consolidate a little by making the neutral cards more powerful. And we are in what I think will remain as the baseline neutral level of the new arena until Blizzard does something else like synergy picks. Because even if the next expansion comes out, as long as it's an expansion that does sort of like normal-ish things, the meta is not going to change too much compared to how the meta has been changing, like every expansion since 7.1 came out and standard and all that stuff.
Yeah, I agree. So I think, all right, anyways, so we've established this, and I think the important takeaway is that now is the time to just use like what the meta is, right? Whatever it is, whether or not you enjoy it, now is the time to improve. So let's talk about one example that I get asked about a lot on stream, which is
deep fried meta.
Yeah, deep fried meta. And
we got such good responses from our last deep fried meta on just like how to play the game that we realized there was a lot of like analysis of the game, and then a lot of like complaining about the synergy picks. And a lot of like, I guess we're not 100% sure what exactly is special about KFT besides reward the board, right?
Nope.
But now we have so much experience built up that we can go like layers deeper into what are the elements of gameplay. These are not new things, right? KFT didn't do anything new, but these are elements that, like, certain elements are being brought more into the forefront than they used to be.
Right. So I think the big topic I want to talk about is just using initiative versus using minions on the board, or like sort of when to use initiative. And by initiative, I want to put a special emphasis on out-of-hand initiative, independent initiative. So something like a Shadow Bolt, something like a Fire.
Why don't we back off? What is initiative before we get to what out-of-hand initiative is?
My gosh, we are going real basic here. Soon we'll have to be like, what is a card? How does a card feel?
What card is its ability plus its possible stats as a minion?
Or weapon. Yes. Anyways, initiative in Hearthstone. You know, I'll make you answer this. You have something in mind. You have something in mind.
No, I mean, initiative is very basic. What we mean by initiative is just that it does something. Like, you can make it do something. That's all we mean.
That's the elegant definition that you had in mind.
You can make it do something. This game is not elegant, all right? This game is very much like, it's a pretty basic game. Like, of all the trading card games, Hearthstone, like, I think everyone knows, is one of the most basic games. And that works to its favor too. It means it's not too terribly complex. It's easy to get into, but the layering is still there, right? Because you're facing an opponent and there's a lot of randomness elements. So there's skill, but it's easy to like kind of get into and difficult to refine, right? So what initiative is very basic. If you have a minion on the board, you don't have initiative. If you have a minion on the board and a turn has passed and now you can attack with it, you have initiative. If you have like a fireball, you have initiative because you can fireball anything at any time. If you have a buff and you have a minion on the board that can attack something, then your buff has initiative. If you have a buff in your hand and you don't have anything on the board to buff that can attack, well, then you don't have initiative. And there's also the question of sometimes like you can also waste initiative, right? Quote unquote waste, which means if you play like a charging minion and you don't charge at anything, well, you've kind of wasted the initiative. If I play a the charging devil sword, the 8 mana 7/7 charge, and there's no minions on my opponent's board that I hit with it, well, I played an 8 mana 7/7. So you can waste your initiative too. But that's what initiative is. That's what we're talking about. It's the ability to do something.
Yeah, good. Very good definition, keeping it simple. I like it. But yes, initiative is basically you just being able to do stuff. Wow, what a great definition.
And stuff on the board. Sorry, more clearly. Yeah, stuff on the board. So yes, if you like heal your face for 5, you just did something, but it had no impact on the board, so it doesn't count. Yep.
All right, so ADWCTA, it seems like you have a scenario in mind as well. Do you want to paint this picture?
For our using initiative topic. Okay.
Yeah.
The picture is, well, why don't you talk about out of card initiative first? So,
sure.
Because we're talking about something like more specific. Like, I don't want people to get confused.
Right. What I was initially saying with initiative, judging by ADWCTA's definition, there are many ways to do stuff, right? You can first buff a card. So let's say you drop a minion. It has summoning sickness, so you can't attack with it. The next turn, let's say it's a 2/2 minion, and then you bone mare it on the next turn, and now suddenly it is a 6/6 minion, and you're attacking. Well, the bone mare has initiative, but it has no initiative unless you have another minion, which is the 2/2 on the board. So the 2/2 has initiative, and you're adding initiative to it, or you can also define it as the bone mare having initiative. But the bone mare is conditional, right? That is conditional initiative.
So the bone mare itself, the 5/5, has no initiative. The +4 has initiative when you have something on the board. But the 2/2 stats, that's 6/6 that you have, you turn the minion into, that 2/2 still, like, it has initiative, but it's always had initiative. So you didn't add to it by playing the bone mare.
No. So you have something that is conditional initiative, for example, like Bone Mare, Blessing of Kings, etc. Something like a Fireball or a Shadow Bolt, which is unconditional, right? You don't need something to happen in order for you to obtain the initiative, to sort of withdraw the initiative. And these are, I want to differentiate sort of these two, because I think it's very important when we lay out the example and when we talk about it. And then, yeah, okay, anyways, go on.
Yeah, and we're talking about out of hand initiative. So it's a card that gives you initiative, not a minion. Like, if you have to wait a turn, it's like kind of a little too late because your opponent already has a turn to do their stuff, to change the board, right? So if I want to affect the board in X way, but I have to wait a turn for this thing to trigger, well, the board doesn't look like that anymore. So it's like on the next turn I would have initiative, but that's not the initiative that I have on this turn's board, and that's what we're concerned with right now. So and also just one more thing about conditional initiative Merps is talking about. Like, think about Stampeding Kodo. Stampeding Kodo is a card with conditional initiative, even though it doesn't buff anything, and because it's literally a card that on a certain condition it does something on the board, right? So, or like if you're thinking of like Houndmaster, that's conditional initiative, not just because it buffs something, but you actually have to synergize it to buff something. So there's a lot of ways to get situational. And I think the point that we want to separate out conditional is that nothing we're going to say from here on out is really going to touch too much on conditional initiative. Because a lot of conditional initiative is like, depending on how like difficult it is to trigger the initiative, to like make the thing have initiative. Like if it's a bone mare, it's pretty easy to make it have initiative, just like have the board. So if you think that you can still have the board the turn after that, then this card will still have initiative the turn after that, and you can save it. But if something's more esoteric, like a Kodo, well, if you don't get initiative on this turn, it's probably not going to have initiative on the next turn, right?
Yeah.
So then you just kind of have to like use it when you can use it, and this whole like thing that we're about to talk about just kind of falls away. But the scenario that I'm going to set up that Merps is going to play around with a little is just you have a hand. Let's say you have 3-4 cards in your hand, and one of your cards, and only one of your cards, is a fireball. None of your other cards charge or like have initiative or do whatever. They're just like minions. But one of your cards is a fireball or a weapon or just something with initiative. So the various scenarios that are going to play out from here is, when do I use it?
Simple question.
It's a powerful card, right? Almost all cards with initiative are very powerful cards. You got to use it somehow. You're going to be better off using it anytime than not using it. So it's not like, oh, this is a good turn to use the fireball. Yeah, every turn's a good turn to use the fireball. It's a fireball, right? This is not like a flame strike where like, no, not every turn is a good turn to use a flame strike. So when do you actually use the fireball? Do you save it until you face like a giant threat, or do you use it to gain tempo? Do you like how do you use it? What situations? What are you thinking about before you use the fireball? Besides, I can use a fireball. Fireball is good. I will fireball. Because that is like too basic, right? Like someone just picking up Hearthstone will probably realize fireball is good. I can use fireball. I will use fireball, and they're done.
Yeah. So I think the most common scenario that I see is, like the opponent has a minion. I have like a minion or 2 minions on the board with initiative. Like their summoning sickness is gone, right? And then I have, so in your scenario, I have 1 fireball, right? I have 1 fireball. I can use that. And essentially my question becomes, do I use the minions on the board to trade, or do I use the fireball? I think that's the most common scenario.
Okay, so first scenario, let's talk about this first, is you have minions on the board that you can use, or you can use a fireball.
Right. And so let's go through the considerations for that. And we can go through what happens when we sort of go down each fork. So fork number 1, I have the minions on the board, and let's say because I only have 1 fireball, my other cards are just minions, right? When I trade my minions into his minion, and then let's say I do a 1-for-1 trade, and then I go face, or I do 2 for 1, and then I drop 1 or 2 minions. What's happening is I do not sort of speed up the game, right? I like keep pace, and I say, okay, I'm gonna play my turn 4 versus your turn 4, my turn 5 versus your turn 5, 6 into 6.
Okay, put some real numbers on there. Your opponent plays a 3-3. You have a 2-2 and a 1-1. You trade the 2-2 and the 1-1 into the 3-3. You put out a 4-4. Your opponent plays a 4-4. You trade the 4-4 in. You play a 5-5. Right? You are keeping pace. That doesn't mean your board looks the same this turn as the turn before. It means you're adding 1-1's worth of stats to your board every turn to keep pace with the rising amount of availability.
Right. So yeah, I think that's a good thing to establish. The board will look different. The power level will consistently get higher, but assuming that both players are able to play to the full 5 mana, 6 mana, 7 mana that they have, it'll be a very similar board on both sides. Now, when I make the trade, and if I keep on making the trade, I am saying the speed at which this is going, and assuming everything goes down the line, is okay with me, right? I'm okay extending this game, whether it is because I have very strong follow-ups, like it is going into turn 5, I have a great turn 5. It's going into turn 6, I have a great turn 6. I don't need to sort of change the speed of the game at all. I think I can get an advantage just by playing sort of down the line, I'll call it that. So that's when I would trade. And also, there's sort of no need to go face at that point, which is something I'll talk about. One of the reasons I would use the fireball. So if you use the fireball on the minion, what would happen is naturally you go face with the, let's say, two minions you have on there. And what you have done is you have essentially sped up the game, right? Instead of you saying, I'm going to play down the line, I'm just going to match my turn 5 with your turn 5, 6 with 6. I'm speeding up the game. I'm going face. And now next turn, you might be able to overtake me, but or just, match me. But I have sped up the game to an extent in which I am now one turn ahead in terms of just pushing face. So,
okay, so scenario number 1, tempo is exactly the same. I am fireballing the target. Let's say the target's a 3-3. I have a 2-2 and a 1-1. Okay, let's not say fireball, let's say frostbolt. I'm going to frostbolt the target. And what that does is it saves me 3/3's worth of stats on the board that can go face on this turn. I don't improve my stats on the board. I don't make my stats worse on the board. I use the frostbolt. I get rid of the opponent. I keep going face. And I add a 1/1's worth of stats some other way, right?
Sure.
And so I'm keeping pace, and I have now pushed face damage.
Yes.
Okay. No, keep going. I just want to establish it because you're very you're very airy, oh, and then you could just push face damage. I'm like, yes, if you fireball something, you can push face damage. That is something that a fireball can do. But I want people to know what's happening on the board when that happens.
Right. Yeah, I think that's
because important. That's very critical for what's about to happen next as a distinction.
Yeah. So we look at the end result of these two decisions, and what ends up happening is when you decide to fireball, you speed up the game in terms of the amount of pressure you're dealing to their face, the number of turns it could potentially take for you to get lethal on them. So you're not speeding up the game in terms of you getting out more tempo, right? It's not that kind of speed. It's just you putting more pressure on your opponent's life total and speeding up the process in which one of you, like one side, starts pushing. And that, I think, is important because that's a decision you have to make, like knowing the deck. You have to see sort of like how aggressive is your deck, and what you want your goal to be, how many turns you foresee this game going.
Okay, so getting into more specifics, assuming you have one removal in your hand, no removals in your deck in a hypothetical, or you just don't expect to draw, like you have one removal and there's 15 cards or something, and you use it, and you go face. What you want to do is you want to save that until you can use it, go face, and then you have lethal the next turn if he doesn't do anything. That way, you put your opponent into the situation where your opponent has to do something every single turn, whether it's a taunt, whether it's a removal, whether it's a freeze, whether it's a heal, or else he loses. And that's very powerful. On the other hand, if you have two removals, well, you don't have to do it. You don't have to wait until you have 2-turn lethal. You can wait when you have 3-turn lethal, because you're going to remove the next thing he puts out too. So those are the usual, this is not a hard rule in that obviously the situation changes based on all the stuff that happens in the game. But as a general rule of thumb, that is a good time to go face. Like if at that time you're still not going face, you have to really ask yourself, why am I not going face at that time and using this removal? What am I saving this for?
Yeah, I think that's a good summary of sort of what you want to do in that specific scenario, right? So do you want to change the scenario now?
Yeah. So let's change the scenario very quickly. We are not using it to go face anymore. Much more, when you're going face, that's a very low chance that you're using the removal just so you can go face. It usually happens later in the game, and like I said, right, you need 2-turn lethal or 3-turn lethal if you have 2 removals. It does happen. You need to be aware of it. That's the bottom. That's the safety net. That's if at this point you're still not using the removal, you're really holding on to that thing for way too long. End the freaking game. On the other hand, there are many much more advantageous situations where you may want to use a removal not to get face damage, but to get bored. If your opponent has a 3-6, you have a fireball, and you have 2 3-3s. Using a fireball doesn't just get you 6 face damage from you to your opponent. What it also does is it preserves 3 extra stats on your side of the board compared to how many stats your opponents put out. So your opponent played a minion that's really good against what you have on the board. You use the removal to make him not get that advantage and preserve your current advantage. That is a tempo play with removal. So you're going to be using removals for tempo plays much more liberally than you use removals for face plays. Like, face plays are, unless you're a hunter, because then you have, like, you know, your 2 or 3 turn lethal expands to like 4 or 5 turn lethal, and you have like a different calculation going on. But generally speaking, you're kind of pushed to the edge. That's a backup. That's like, at this point you need to use it. But to use it before then, what you usually want to do is to get tempo on the board. So what you have to ask is, do I want the tempo? Obviously you want the tempo, but like, how much do I want the tempo, right? Because the tempo is not costless. The tempo costs your removal, one of the best cards in your hand and in your entire deck. And if you only have one removal, which is the entire hypo we're dealing with, you will not have another removal. Which means when your opponent then plays anything else that demands to be answered on that turn, your board better be able to handle everything. And if your board can't handle everything, your opponent can win the game right there by flipping the board, because you have used your removal too early, because you were greedy to try to get the tempo. Or I guess maybe not greedy, maybe like hasty to try to get the tempo. So that's a very stressful kind of situation, because on one hand, like I said from the very beginning, anytime you use a fireball, it is good for you. So if you keep asking yourselves, what is my best play? Which a lot of people do, right? They look at their hand, they're like, what is my best play on this turn? The answer will almost always be fireball it. And when you fireball something, you will get some initiative. It will be better than your other plays. It will be better face damage-wise. It will be better tempo-wise. Just a good card. But what you need to also be wary about is, let's say you're only gaining 1 tempo. Let's say you're gaining 2 extra stats on the board by doing this. Do you need the 2 extra stats? If it's turn 6, you already have 8 stats on the board. Do you need 2 more extra stats on top of that? You're kind of fine. The 2 extra tempo doesn't really do all that much for you. On the other hand, having your opponent potentially, like, I don't know, hide a Cult Master behind 2 taunts on the next turn or something. Like, you're screwed if you can't remove it at that point. Like, you lose the game to your opponent, right? If your opponent has a Flame Strike or something and you're kind of playing into it, if you fireball and keep your board. On the other hand, if you trade some stuff with the board, you can get something with a higher health minion and prevent your opponent from Flame Striking. You're preserving your board better by not using your removal, even though it's lower tempo and definitely lower face damage. So the question you always want to ask is, how much extra tempo am I getting from this than my normal other, like, normal trade, you know, going down, like Merp said, down the line kind of plays? And how much do I care about that tempo? So just because you've identified that you are getting more tempo does not mean use the fireball. It just means, well, now I have to think harder about whether I should use the fireball. Like, if let's say you have 3 tempo and it's turn 7, for example, well, yeah, then maybe getting 2 extra tempo from that fireball this turn is very useful for helping you hold the board. You know, especially against a paladin or something. You just want that tempo. That's good. It's a good use for a fireball, even if it opens you up to a potential board flip. But if you have the board, then don't use that fireball, because that fireball is your lifeline. It's your only card with initiative from your hand. Your opponent can do weird stuff. This is KFT now. Like, there are so many expansions that have changed the ability of all the classes in the arena to do so many weird things to flip the board. You want to be prepared. So that's the new calculation that comes in. So what Merps is talking about is the deal face damage, speed the game up calculation. And what I'm talking about here is the tempo calculation on how to value the incremental additional tempo that you inevitably get from a fireball. And on the other hand, if doing a fireball doesn't actually get you more tempo, you probably shouldn't do it, because it's such a good card that you should use it to get some tempo at some point.
And look, sometimes it'll happen, right? Like, if you go to turn 4 and you have nothing but a fireball, you gotta use, because it is still a net positive, even though it is not what you're looking for out of a typical fireball use. And I think,
well, like, you're talking about value at that point, because tempo-wise, the difference at that point between using a fireball and not using a fireball, even if it's on like a 3/3, is probably something like three tempos worth. When you only have like 4 mana, that's 75% of your tempo. That's like huge, right? Yes, I do want this huge amount of tempo gain from a fireball. That's a good use of fireball, but only because I don't have other options. Like, objectively, if you look at value, fireballing a 3/3 is not the best, not what you're going for, but for the fireball usually.
Yeah, and I think you make really good points about you know, sort of using fireball for tempo, because the scenario that I get asked about the most is people seem confused on whether or not they should use a fireball when they could just make a trade, right? And past my example is very sort of simplistic. because mine doesn't take as much of the board into consideration, as much sort of tempo calculation into consideration. But I think it's because they're asking the wrong question, right? It's like you're asking the right question. It's like, how much of an advantage am I getting with this? Which I think is a good question to ask. And most people ask the question, is the fireball good this turn?
Yeah, that's a bad question to ask about a fireball. That's a good question to ask of a bad card, and a bad question to ask of a good card.
Right. If you're looking at, I can't even think of a bad card, or just like a slow card.
Yeah,
right?
or like a raid leader or something. You're like, hey, I can get a lot of value out of raid leader this turn. That's good because like things are going to happen. You're probably not going to get great value out of raid leader again.
Yeah. But with something like a fireball, if the question that you were asking is this a good turn for it? Wow, you're going to find it's going to be a yes quite often. But in the KFT meta, in which removal is harder to find, unconditional initiative is harder to find, you're going to sort of see this presented more often, and you should think about this more often. You shouldn't waste your fireballs, right? You should more carefully calculate how much tempo you're gaining out of it, and sort of how much you need this, and look at your following turns in order to see whether or not you should use it.
Yep. And now I'm going to get to the really fun stuff for using
Oh my gosh. All right, let's do it.
You remember the last Lightforge when we talked about holding the line, and then we talked about the line breaking, and how sometimes you just kind of have to let the line break because the next turn it was going to break anyway, and you might as well as not fight a lost battle because, like, if it doesn't matter if your opponent buffs this turn or next turn, you're still screwed. Then let them buff this turn and preserve some resources, or try to dig for some answers, or just do something to try to save your position. Don't try to like hold the line when it won't hold. Like when you see your cards, you're like, well, I'm screwed next turn. Let it break. Okay. Now you factor in removals into this, right? Your one initiative card. This is what we mean by saving your resources, because a lot of times, especially against, I'm thinking Paladin mostly, you have to use your initiative cards to keep the Paladin off the board, because the Paladins like to set up for their buffs. And they always have a 1/1 that they can generate with 2 mana, and they can play multiple minions in a turn, and you just don't have enough attack on the board to wipe them out every turn. And so if you do need to wipe them out, you're usually using a card with initiative, and eventually you're going to come down to, well, I have 1 card left with initiative. Do I prevent my opponent from being able to buff the next turn, even though I am fireballing at 3/3? And I guess your answer is, what are you doing next?
Right.
If you're going to keep holding the line, then that's a pretty good incentive to use your fireball, because your fireball will allow you to hold the line. If you're not going to generally be holding the line, then getting some like extra tempo this turn may not be all that important, because your opponent's about to have a huge swing in tempo that'll overshadow anything you try to do here. And maybe and the turn in which your opponent gets to use the buff doesn't really matter, because he's going to get this tempo either this turn or next turn. So you also have to factor in what position you are, right? Whether you're in a hold the line position, or you're in a counter strike position, or you're in a preparing for the line to break situation. And you also have to keep in mind on top of that your opponent is vaguely, even if they're not listening to the Lightforge and doing exactly what we're telling you to do, they're vaguely aware that they're like, oh, I have too much stuff on the board. I'm a little vulnerable to getting, consecrated or whatever. Maybe I'll just draw cards instead, right? Or maybe I'll like slow down the tempo. They'll think in like ways like that. And so if you have more initiative cards in your hand, you could play 2 or 3 of them on one turn. That's a much higher chance of being able to flip the board than if you just had 1 card. So if you have if you're about to lose the board, a totally great strategy, like you're in a bad position, but a totally great strategy is to hold the 1 initiative card you have and hope you draw another one, and like play cards that draw extra cards to try to draw you 2 initiative cards. And then you have something like, I don't know, like Volcanic Potion with a Frostbolt, which is a total of 5 mana, and then you can drop a minion after that, and you would have cleared like almost his entire board, or you can ping after that to clear his entire board. Like, you're looking for those flips at those times, and cards with initiative are pretty much necessary for flips.
Yep. Yeah, so I think with these flips, it's just hard for people to see sort of the value of not flipping, right? People get anxious, and I understand it is very, very scary. Like when you actively tell yourself, I can take the paladin off the board, but I am choosing not to do it, is really scary. I still feel, I'm just like, oh, I think I have this read. I think it's like 30%, you know, or it's like 20% or something, or they could always just top deck it, right? Yeah. And it feels really bad, but you just have to learn to let it go sometimes. So it comes to reads, it comes to turn planning, right? And sort of worst case scenario. But I think one thing that is very underrated is just sort of like learning to accept these percentages, learning to accept and hold on to Fireball and know that like it's the right play. You can still get punished for it. Like you're saving it because it's like what Adam said. The Fireball is a very, very good play, but sometimes you just have to keep it and then take the punishment if you do get punished for it.
Yeah. So usually, like keeping the Fireball play, like you make the keep the Fireball play when you're up. Usually that's what happens. But sometimes you make it when you're either down or about to be down because you're holding for the flip. And you'll see us do that too, where they're like, why are you not just doing that? And we're like, well, we're trying to win the game. Like, yeah, Fireball will make us lose a little like slower, but we're trying to gather our resources to actually win the game. Maybe. Yeah, maybe a 10-15% chance, but it's better than the like 2% chance you have if you blow your Fireball now. So it's you gotta play with the odds at certain points. And just in case you're wondering, right, like I use the example of Cultmaster hiding behind taunts, but like think of like Vicious Fledgling or just like, you know, stuff you need to remove off the board. That's what removals are for, right? Your opponent is trying to set stuff up. They will put something on the board that you cannot remove with the amount of attack on your board, and then remove your whatever minions that you think are going to prevent them from doing something like that, because those minions on your side all have a low health and high attack. You know, or like a poisonous minion or something. Like they can get rid of those things. So you can never, if it's just a minion on the board that you're using, like that you're kind of factoring in as like, oh, next turn I'm gonna have 7 attack on the board. You may not have 7. You may end up with like 4, right? Like your opponent may use 1 mana and all of a sudden you only have 4 attack. So you gotta assess your vulnerability when it comes to that. And sometimes you look at your board and you're like, well, I have a whole bunch of things with very low health. So yeah, I have a whole bunch of attack, but I may be in danger, so I'm going to hold this removal because 1, I don't want to overcommit on the board anymore, and 2, to the extent that my opponent does something, he could flip the board very easily and put down a Vicious Fledgling type card that will grow or repeatedly buff something or just have some repeating characteristic, and then I will need something with initiative to break through it.
Yep. All right. Hopefully that helps you guys in this scenario because it's something that I face a lot more often. In Ungoro, I used to have a lot more removal. So I was like, I could use this Meteor. I have 1 more in the deck. I have this Glyph. I have Flame Strike. Yeah, let's just use it right now. Right. And I'm like, whatever. Now, if I have a removal, I value it very highly. I need to be very protective of the removal that I have because it's very few, and I also have to be more aware of what my follow-up turns are going to be and the potential punishes by not using it, because my default is sort of like not, or it's less likely that I will use it now, right? And this is what we mean by saying KFT is more skilled than the post 7.1 meta or the Ungoro meta, however you want to call it, just because you need to be more in tune with your position in the game, and you need to be able to use these rarer resources better. Like previously, if you misplayed or misvalued it, it kind of didn't matter because you just use your 2nd, 3rd, and 4th one. But now you have 1 and you need to use it in the most advantageous spot.
So like if you're talking about skill when it comes to stuff like this, it goes in 2 directions. If you have none of a resource or like just 1 in your deck, that's not skill because you need to draw it and you're not going to draw it. If you have too many of the resources, that's also not that much skill because you can play it whenever, right? You can just keep using removals, especially when removals are easier to play than minions are. So this mid zone is what they're shooting for. And so
Yeah.
Blizzard overshot when they made all these spells available and all these powerful spells in Ungoro, and then gave that spell and weapon bonus. But KFT had so few like good removal and initiative like spells, and added so many more cards in, and the Ungoro bonus is gone, that we have like pulled it back so that you're in a pretty good zone now with the spell and weapon bonus. And this is kind of what Blizzard was afraid of, right? Blizzard was afraid because they thought that in MSG, and I disagree with them on that, but they thought that in MSG, removals had become so rare that the resource was more like, you know, luck-based and less fun. So Blizzard wanted the number of removals that each deck had to be of a certain number, and it wasn't like that. It wasn't high enough. But then I feel like in Ungoro, it just got too high that it actually impacted skill. And now we're back to this like pretty solid area, right? Like I would still prefer fewer removals, but I think we're back in a good zone here.
Yep.
Okay, so that's Deep Fried Meta, where we deep fry the meta. Let's move on to question from the GOAT. What's our question from the GOAT this week, Merps?
Question from the GOAT is, you know, I wish I could give credit to this person, but I don't remember. It was a question that was posed this past week during a stream. And to be fair, it's a question that other people have asked a few times, which is sort of what motivates us to keep playing after how many years? 3, 4?
A little over 3 years now.
This many years, and not just playing, but what keeps us motivated after achieving all that we have achieved in this game, right? Like we have both placed very high on the leaderboards. We have gone you know, past infinite, and we have played through many metas, many times, a lot of the classes. What keeps us motivated? Do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that keeps me motivated is you guys, like our listeners, our potential listeners, you know, viewers, and just not because you guys are watching us, but because I'm hoping that this is, you know, helpful to people. Like I always. Look at Merv's making ridiculous expressions, but I always enjoy I like teaching, and more than that, I like giving resources to people who want to help themselves, right? Like we don't go out and like solicit people and have like, you know, and help them. They have to come, they have to find us, they have to like take the time and the effort to actually understand what we're talking about. And we don't talk about things from the most basic level. We're not here to provide like the beginner's guide to how to play the arena. We're here to like pick you up on like the advanced intermediate level and bring you up to like a pretty good like expert level, like, you know, infinite like level. That's our goal. It's to pick up that last step of going from like 5 wins to 7 wins. Like that's how I view like my like mission statement of doing, you know, making the Lightforge, doing 12 win videos, streaming and all that. Like that's what I explain. That's what I explain to. So that's always, and like as long as the game will exist, or if you apply the same thing as a metaphor to other situations in life, that's always what I'm interested in. So that doesn't change, even if, no matter where I place on the leaderboard, no matter what Blizzard does with the game, as long as it's still, you know, fun and they're still doing new stuff to it, I'll continue to do this.
Cool. All right. So my reason, a lot of it has to do with purely selfish reasons. All right. I want to get better at this game. If at any point I look at this game and I say, I am done, I have conquered this game, I am perfect, right? Like I'm just the absolute
Numero
best.
uno is not perfect? What?
Let's keep it a secret. Just between us. Just between, you know, just among the listeners of the Lightforge, I will admit I'm not perfect, all right? Just insider, like a little bit of insider news. But because, all right, if at any point, and this is with any game, obviously not just Hearthstone, if at any point I feel as if I do not have any more growth potential with the game, then why would I play it, right? The challenge is gone, sort of, and the fun of learning can be fun, guys. That goes away. A big part of the overall fun just goes away. So I think I've said this quite a few times. We can go back or I can go back to like all of my 12-win runs. And if I want to go turn by turn, I can probably find at least 3 to 4 misplays in a 12-win run. for every single run, at least 3 to 4 misplays. Although what I define as misplays, they're not just like, huge, terrible misplays, but, knowing what I know now, or having more time to think about it, or just, not fooling around with something on stream, I would have done something different. And obviously it didn't make such a big difference that time to impact the result. But it's interesting to see those scenarios, right? And to identify, I'm just like, oh, wow, I still periodically suck at this game. So let's get better at it. Because, and a lot of people sort of, laugh at sort of how it's just curve stone, it's easy here or there. I find it really cool that I've been able to achieve what I have achieved and still periodically suck at the game. So that's basically it. It's just a constant climb, right? And at the very end, the grind gets harder. It's always, at the beginner gains are real. And then at the very end, it's like the eking out the few, like 0.001%. That's fun, which it doesn't sound fun. I've just made it sound very unfun. But no, that's fun.
I get what you mean. I'm also like doing this for the intellectual, like figuring out the game part. Like we're breaking down cards to such a level of like tedium in the algorithm right now, and trying to get everything perfect because I want to really understand how all the pieces of Hearthstone, the game, not even just the arena, of how it like fits together on a what is 1 damage on a minion like kind of way. And it gets like I keep getting closer, and then more and more problems come up, and it makes me think about the game in a different way or put a different perspective on it. Sometimes I start thinking about a factor that you used to think was unconnected, and I start realizing just how important it is and how much it can sway the value of a card, which then makes me think about my gameplay. And there's, like I said, right, it's a very simple game from the basic mechanics, but that means that you can drill down very deep, right? Like chess is such a simple game from its mechanics, but you can drill down very deeply and very precisely because of that. And that's what I like about Hearthstone. And that's why I'm always like, you'll see me be against all the crazy cards, because I'm like, what are you doing, right? Like, if you make a whole bunch of things super crazy, then it's pointless to drill down so deep and so precisely. And that's what I would prefer to be doing.
Yep. All right. So that's a question from the go. I thought that was a very good question because we see a lot of threads about it's like, oh, getting burnt out on this game. I can't keep on playing. And obviously, the Hearthstone community sometimes just gets frustrated, right? And whether about the price or about the gameplay, and the game has been out for a while, and the negativity can grow, and people start.
It's because the baseline keeps going up. Like the positivity is built in. There's this many people playing the game. It's a good product, like generally speaking.
Yeah. But then people wonder, it's like, how can people keep on playing this game? Like, what keeps people motivated, right? And it's kind of easy to see what keeps them motivated if they're, if they haven't reached legend yet, right? And they want to reach legend, or if they're not infinite yet and they want to reach infinite. They've had this goal for a while and they haven't reached it. Obviously, that's what they would strive for. But for people who have reached infinite and super infinite and gotten very high up on the leaderboards, it's sort of like, well, what do you keep on playing? Because there are no tournaments, right? There's no prizes. We don't even get like a free t-shirt. It's not like every time you place on there, you get another t-shirt, and I could be like, wow, I could really use another t-shirt. Yeah, but no, it doesn't happen. So it is, for myself, it is purely just sort of like self-improvement reasons. And for you, I guess it's all about the sappy community stuff that you just said.
Hey, I like the sappy community stuff.
I'm sure you do.
And the sappy community stuff likes us.
Yep.
So yeah, that's a question from the GOAT. Question from the GOAT brought to you by our Patreons. Patreon.com/grinninggoat. Keeps the lights on at the Lightforge podcast and allows us to do what we do. And to continue improving all the experiences, in all of our products that we do. So thank you guys. let's move on to card good bad. We're just hitting a string of like questionable cards now. Where we're past the ultimate infestation.
We got called out for it.
Yeah, we got called out for it, which is true. We generally do good cards because there's
yeah.
more to talk about. It's more useful, right? If it's a bad card has a low tier score, you're probably not going to pick it. But here, like today, we're going to play Shaman, and we'll talk about Shaman after this. But we figure it's pretty easy to find a bad card in Shaman because Shaman's pretty bad, especially in this expansion. And the card that I picked for card good bad is Icebreaker, which is a 73. Icebreaker, if you don't know, and you might not know because you will almost never see this card, is a 3-mana 1/3 that says destroy any frozen minion damaged by this. I'm bringing this card up because it was one of the biggest surprises how many people, when we rated this card, disagreed with us. Like, we thought it was super obvious, right? It's like a Light's Justice, which we have rated, by the way, and I will keep making a comparison with Light's Justice. Light's Justice is a 158 in Paladin. Once again, Paladin is not really the same as Shaman. It gets like a bunch of extra bonuses for stuff like that for 1-mana like things because of its hero power, but is a 158. And that very last charge of Light's Justice really doesn't do all that much. That's not raising the score by more than like 10 points at most. Icebreaker is a 73. And on top of that, you have Spirit Claws, which is a 56. So Icebreaker is in this weird category where it's actually better than Spirit Claws, even though it is 1 mana higher. But both of these are extremely, extremely low. So, like the question I get most is, why are these not all a lot higher? I have a lot of use out of just dealing 1 damage, and sometimes it's like insanely good. And the reason is because, and they make the comparison to Light's Justice usually. And I think the simple answer is the one that I had kind of alluded to before, which is that Paladins have a hero power. So Light's Justice it deals 2 damage on the next turn. That kills half of your 2-drops. More than half of your 2-drops. You are on curve. It is amazing for the curve. It gets so much value from being a curve card. Icebreaker is not only not on curve in that way, it actually, to play it, it takes away your curve if you want to play it like with 3 mana until later on in the game. It's always anti-tempo unless something's actually frozen. And on top of all of that, it is like 3 times the amount of mana.
Yeah. This is I think these cards are just hard to sort of conceptualize generally because I've seen it both ways in terms of the criticism of this score. I've seen people say that it is too low and also too high as well, right? Because it's sort of, I think pings are hard to evaluate because it's very board specific and it's very sort of situational specific, right? A ping could be worth very little, as some people might conceptualize, like it's just 1 damage, and a ping can mean everything, right? For a non-ping class. And also with these cards, it is, you have to factor in, like with Icebreaker, the times in which you do kill something that is frozen, which is small, but when you are able to do that, it's huge value. It's really freaking good. And then you add that in into a score, and that is, you know, some cards, it's tough to sort of conceptualize the value of the card because they have this like these niche or low percentage times that they raise the value significantly, right? Like BGH is a good example. You would never ever, like if it was just a 5 mana for 2, it would be a complete trash card. But you also have to count in for the fact that sometimes it does hit something, even though it's very, very low chance, and that keeps it from being like the worst card in existence.
Yeah, and just in case you're wondering, you have like on average about 2 freezes in Shaman per deck.
Yeah.
So like they're there, but 1, you have to freeze them and either have an Icebreaker equipped or still have 3 extra mana on that turn and no weapon that you need to replace. 2, you're probably not going to freeze them again, so it's only going to destroy the minion once. And 3, you still have to take the face damage even if you're destroying the minion. So, like, This is how the score is. If you think that it's an amazing card, it's not, and I'm sure you realize it after you picked it a couple times. If you think it's a really bad card, it's also not that bad of a card if you find yourself with a whole bunch of freezes. Because once you get like the charge off like once, this weapon has already paid for itself, right?
Right.
Like think about the poison venomous blade for rogue.
That's
Envenom weapon, yeah. That's 3 mana. You get like basically 2 charges of it onto your dagger, but your dagger it's 2 more mana for the second charge. So this is basically the same as killing 1 minion once for 3 mana. And then you get 2 free bonus like daggers. So it becomes an insanely good card if you can actually use it. Like on a level that's much higher than where we rate it. So if you find yourself with a whole ton of freezes, obviously it's worth a shot. And obviously, like we said before, it's not useless even if you don't trigger it. On the other hand, you look at something like a more easy to trigger Spirit Claws. What's the upside, right? Like the upside is still a 3 damage weapon, which is not the best thing in the world.
Okay.
All right, so that's Icebreaker, and let's go into the wider Shaman discussion. I mentioned that it sucks. I've thought Shaman has sucked for like many expansions now. Like,
right.
Like it was okay in MSG, I guess. It was like middling, and it's just been going downhill since 7.1 hit. And then they nerfed Hex. So, you want to talk about Shaman and why? I don't know. We never do well with Shaman. I think like it kind of sucks. The KFT cards are obviously rated pretty low compared to other classes, and there's no like good theme that's coming out of this expansion for the Shaman. Right.
That's one of the problems. I think. Okay, so here's a way I see Shaman, and I will preface it by saying I do not consider myself a good Shaman player. ADWCTA will agree with this, but then ADWCTA is also not the best Shaman player. So it's really like the blind meeting the blind here. I'm probably blinder when it comes to this.
Just to give you an idea of how bad we think Shaman is, we rated literally tied with Warrior in the final tier.
Yeah, and I think I'm not too far off in that assessment. But part of the reason Shaman is so weak right now is because it got sort of the mage treatment in that the KFT cards and the KFT meta impacted mages in the similar way in which it impacted Shaman and brought both of them down. In which it sort of muddied their identity, as in like right now they are sort of playing this awkward mid-range, small, techie sort of style in which the rest of your draft kind of defines what kind of deck you have, not exactly the class cards from KFT, which is sort of scary because you don't have that safety blanket of when you go into the draft knowing, okay, I'm drafting a control mage, right? Or I'm drafting a like volcano shaman. Like, you know, when you knew you were getting at least one volcano, right? And then you could play sort of control, you could play slow, and you could get your elementals with Shaman, just like you could with Mage. Now, you know, you're drafting cards like Burlock, which is fine, and, you know, 2/2 for 2 and a freeze is nice, but it doesn't really win you the game, right? Same with something like Avalanche. Is it good to have initiative? Is it good to have a freeze as well? Sure, but you know, it's no volcano, right?
Yep.
And mages and shamans got hurt in very similar ways now, in which they are not, you know, they can't go aggro because their cards are not aggressive, but they're also not big. They're very mid-range, they're very small. So I just don't really know what their identity is, right? And you go into the draft and you just hope it's like, man, I hope the rest of my draft is good because I can't really rely on the KFT cards. And guess what? The KFT cards have an offering bonus.
Yep. I mean, it's flexible, right? Right now, Shaman's flexible. They're just not good at anything. So they're flexibly bad at a whole bunch of things, which I guess is better than Warrior. But at least Warrior, you kind of have an idea of what you need to do, and then you'll do it every now and then. And then there are cards that totally save the Warrior. Like you have like a Gorehowl, right? Fool's Bane. They save your draft if you can like draft 1 or 2 of them and then like actually get it in the game. there's nothing really that saves the Shaman. Like Volcano probably comes closest, but Shamans have a lot of like the good Shaman cards. Like what are they? They're pretty normal cards. It's like a Lightning Storm. It's like a Flame Wreath Faceless, you know, or like a Earth Ellie. Like they're pretty normal cards that will very significantly increase your win rate when they're played. That fits into almost every type of deck, but they don't single-handedly win you many games. So you still have to build a deck that gets you there so that these amazing cards like give you the edge, right? Hex included in there. Hex still, even after the nerf, still the second highest rated card in Shaman. It's below Jade Claws now. So what, I guess the way I look at Shaman is that you have totems. You need to have totems. You're in a reward the board situation, so you want to have a board. The problem is that three of the things really that buff stuff are buffing. One gives it immunity, pointless with a totem. One gives it a death rattle to resummon it. You'll never want to put it on a totem. And one gives it extra health, and you're like, I don't really care about that. But on the other hand, if you're looking at KFT, your Cobalt Scalebane,
oh yeah,
is insanely good. Your, Bone Mare obviously is insanely good. And so you do have some things going for it when it comes to like synergies with just these neutral cards that are so dominant in KFT. And so you kind of have to play in that style, I think, where you try to get totems out as much as you can. You're obviously picking these like buff cards anyway. And Shaman has its own buff card in Flame Tongue Totem, so you're not left hanging exactly, and like Evolve, so you're not left hanging exactly, but you don't have a lot of support for your playstyle, no matter what you choose. On the other hand, you could try to go faster. You could do like Stormforge Axes, put down your minions, use some cards for reach, get like a Bloodlust, like Old School or a Wind Fury, and I've tried that as well. It's just not consistent and not powerful enough, and they flip on you too easily to really try to go too aggro with Shaman. So I still think that when it comes to Shaman, you're better off going for like lean into the Volcano a bit more, right? Like go for like a little bit more of a control style, but not just with a full control, like Volcano control flip and try to win that way, but also like build in elements of what you're actually good at, which is to buff your totems, and what KFT's trying to push you in. So now you're in a weird mix of a spot. But if you have good enough cards and then you assess the situation of what your opponent's weakness is, then you can try to exploit that. You have the tools to do anything. They're just not like usually the best tools. But you will have enough of a diversity of them offered to you as Shaman that you can kind of guide your deck where it needs to go and then survive some RNG elements. Like I said, right? Like it's not like I'm getting a high win rate with Shaman, but I think you do have to be a little greedy with both your draft and your play when you're doing this class. Like take the chance that it doesn't quite work out, and you don't actually need a 2-drop. Even though it'd be really, really nice for you to get a 2-drop, you don't have enough cards that qualify as 2-drops to really like super curve out on curve. But if you have some Stormforge Axes or some Jade Claws, that's the direction you kind of should be going a little. So like I said, you're getting pulled in several directions, but you have the tools to make one of them work. You just gotta, between your draft and your gameplay, figure out which direction you go in each game with that.
Cool. Yeah, I thought this was pretty helpful. By pretty helpful, I mean maybe us talking about the Shaman isn't like us talking about mage or paladin, but
druid.
Or druid. I keep on forgetting about the druid.
Yeah,
sorry,
best class in the arena right now.
Really good. But that's we'll play Shaman today. Maybe we'll figure out something. Maybe the light will finally, we'll flip the switch, right? Mm-hmm. I'm hoping so. But until then, it's definitely not a stretch to say that Shaman is not in a good place because of the cards, because of the playstyle, because of the sort of randomness of the draft and of your draws and the totems. Just, yeah. Good luck.
All right. That's it for the Lightforge for this week. Until next week, this is ADWCTA.
This is Merps. Good luck in the arena, guys.
All right.